Hello, my name is Beck and welcome to a list of books that feature magical schools. If you weren't aware, magical school is like a trope technically in fantasy. Usually the most prominent example I can think of is in Harry Potter. Obviously that's a pretty big one, but most fantasy that I really like tends to have a magical school or a variation on that kind of theme. So I thought I'd chuck a list together of books that kind of feature that, so that there's kind of like a resource and a place to go to find recommendations like that, because whenever a new one comes out, it's not specifically advertised as a magical school, so I find them hard to decipher unless I've read the book. So that is why I'm putting this list together. The first one on this list is The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, and I think pretty much most people are aware that this one has a magical university in it, but just in case you don't, Quoth is our main character. It opens with him as an older person in a tavern that he owns, and he's telling his life story to a chronicler, and this chronicler is listening to him over the span of 3 days, and that's supposed to be what the trilogy is, but it's not finished yet. And we get to see Quoth's, for lack of a better word, journey. So part of that journey is him going to a magical university. And at this university, because magic has to be quantifiable, the magic system is alchemy, but there's also an underlying magic system that Quoth saw used when he was a young child, and that's the kind of magic that he's trying to pursue. But it's a little bit harder to unearth, and it's harder to study and find. So that's generally what the gist of The Name of the Wind is. The next one is Bloodsong by Anthony Ryan. This is the first book in the Raven's Shadow trilogy, I think is what it's called. I didn't end up continuing this trilogy, but I thought I'd mention this one anyway, because I really liked Bloodsong. I don't remember the main character's name at this point, but he, as a young child, gets dropped off to this organization, I guess, by his father. His father basically abandons him, and then he is thus trained as technically a soldier, but there is low-key magic playing into it as well, and there's whole factions of this school, and it has a sister school as well, I think, with trained healers. So that is Valen. Valen is his name. So that is what Valen's beginning looks like, and it definitely involves a magical organization, if not school. Next up is one of my favorite series, and it is Lightbringer by Brent Weeks. The first book in this series is The Black Prism, and in here we follow a bunch of different perspectives. Again, it's an adult fantasy, but because it's told through different lenses, you get to experience it from Kip, who is a 16-year-old boy, so it's kind of an avenue for young adult readers to pick up something a little bit more complicated if you are so inclined. This is about Kip as one of the characters. I'm not going to get into everybody because otherwise it will be very complicated, but Kip goes to essentially a magical school. It's called the Chromeria, and in this world the magic system revolves around colours. So some people can transmute the colours as they split light, and others can't. Some can do more than one colour, some can do only a few colours, and then the Prism is the guy who can do all of the colours, and he has a very high up political seat of power. So that's why it's called the Black Prism. There's a whole bunch of other stuff going on as well, obviously, but it does have a magical school that is more military stylized rather than just going to Hogwarts, for example. Next is Ice Wolves by Amy Kaufman. This is a middle grade fantasy trilogy, well, the first book in a trilogy anyway, and it follows Anders and his sister Raina, and both of them are orphans living on the streets when one day there is a shape-shifting test in their town, and one of them shifts into a dragon, one into a wolf, and usually the dragons and the wolves have a long-standing feud and they've never been related before, and Anders gets whisked away to the Ice Wolves school and Raina gets disappeared as well. So it's about Anders attending the school, making friends, and then trying to go and find his sister. So that's what Ice Wolves is. Next is The Wayward Children by Seanan McGuire. I have a few of the books up behind me on the shelf here. The first one is Every Heart a Doorway, and this basic premise is kids go into their magical world. So like Narnia, they go through a door, and this magical world suits them so perfectly that they feel as one in that world. But then eventually sometimes they have the option to return, and then the door might not open again for them, so they're stuck in reality. So this is a magical school. It's not really magical, but it has a bunch of people who have gone to magical worlds and then come back and are struggling to reassimilate. So that's what this school entails. Everyone attending has had that happen to them, and the people there won't restrict them. If their door opens again, they'll let them go. So that's what loosely this premise is. Next is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. This is one that I've seen people rave about, and I think the third one's coming out soon, but it was only a 3 for me. I loved the start, didn't really like the conclusion. So it's just a bit of a miss, but I wanted to include it anyway because it definitely involves a school. Our main character, Rin, ends up attending a school because she wants to escape an arranged marriage to this old dude because her drug dealers or drug family have set that up and she wants to escape that life. So she really puts herself through the ringer when it comes to study at this school, and she's praised for getting the marks she gets. So it's a really interesting look at how unhealthy study can be and how unhealthy expectations can be. And it's an adult book, it's not a young adult book. Even though the beginning kind of sets itself up as a magical school, it becomes something different in the second half. So make sure you go in with that expectation, because I didn't, and that's why I was a bit thrown off. But it's a decent book regardless, and that's why I wanted to put it on this list. And of course, we have to include one of my favourites, and that is Nevernight by J. Christoph. This follows Mia, who has a family who was killed by a political figure, and now she wants to become an assassin and get revenge for their murders. So she goes off to a magical school, but it's actually an assassin school. So that's what Nevernight is. That's the premise of Nevernight. And it's a school that is not necessarily a safe place. It's a school that will test you. So again, it's not really like Hogwarts in the fact that it's a safe haven. It's a school that will kill you if you don't watch out for yourself. Next is Nevermoor by Jessica Townsend. Not necessarily the first book, more so the second, but we follow Morrigan Crow. She gets whisked away through a portal to Nevermoor by a wizard named Jupiter North. And the reason she gets taken away is because her family is quite abusive. Also, the town that she lives in, everyone believes that she's cursed and they blame her for every single thing. So she gets taken away by Jupiter, and it's got very strong found family aspects. It's got very strong support networks and friendships. And the first book is very much a trial, and then the second book is about a magical school. So it doesn't give you the magical school immediately, but there is hints of it in the first book. So that is why Morrigan Crow and Nevermoor is on here, because it's a wonderfully magical series and I want to recommend it every chance that I get. The next book isn't necessarily magical school, but it's got that vibe, but more a soldier academy kind of setting, and it's Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter. This is about Tao, who, after a bunch of stuff happens at the beginning of the plot, finds himself wanting to train to become the best warrior ever. And I can't say why without spoiling anything, so don't read a synopsis, just go in with that expectation and you'll be sweet, because I read the synopsis and I was spoiled for like the first half of the book. So there's your warning, but Rage of Dragons has that military-ish aspect, and the culture is very much built on training and fighting and going to war. So it's not, again, a safe space like Hogwarts, for example. It's not a place that you train to be an assassin either, but it's a place that Tao definitely goes through rigorous training in. Next is another one of my favourites, and it is Percy Jackson. Basically, Percy Jackson, all of the Percy Jackson books in general feature Camp Half-Blood, and that is a place where demigods, so half humans, half gods, go to be safe and make friends and find found families in certain aspects. Again, it's not necessarily a magical school, but it's more like a school camp that has a really cool support network and training and just a great vibe. So that's why I'm including it, because I mean, it's not like an institution technically, but it is very magical and it's just wonderful. I love the Percy Jackson books so much. Next up is the 5th season, which might surprise people to see on this list, but it doesn't have a magical school necessarily, but it's got that vibe, but as an organization. So in this world, we follow a few different perspectives, but one of the aspects of this world is that there are people called origins, and the magic system revolves around these origins being able to manipulate earthly tremors and earthquakes and that kind of thing. So as a child, if something spikes their emotions, it could be catastrophic for everybody around them. So there is an organization that goes around and collects these children in order to train them as origins. So it's not necessarily a positive organization, it's not an uplifting organization, it just is. It's part of the world, it's like a fact, and that's why I wanted to include it, because it has that element to it, but it did something a little bit different with it as well. And while I love tropes, I like it when they're done uniquely, and I like it when they're done subverted, and that's what the 5th season very much did. Next up is The Arithmetist by Brandon Sanderson, and this one follows a character named Joel, and Joel actually has no magical capacity whatsoever, but his mum, I think, was involved with the school, and so now he's got a link to the school. I think she's a cleaner, and he really wants to be part of this magic system. He's got all the know-how, he just can't actually do the spells. So the spells involve chalk magic and chalk drawings and kind of summoning them to life, and he knows all of the drawings and everything. He can do perfect circles and whatever, but he can't do the magic for some reason. So it involves him and another character and a kind of murder mystery aspect because someone keeps breaking in and taking children, and we don't know why. Also, there is a war far off from the school about chalklings and how they're wild and they don't need summoning. So there's a few variations going on here, and it's also obviously got a mystery. It's quite a fun one, but it is a middle grade, so go into it expecting middle grade kind of style writing. It's a little bit more complicated because Brandon likes to throw in his world building, but that's one of the reasons that I loved this. So Arithmetist was kind of a variation on the theme, but it made the magic more complicated, and that's what I quite liked about it. Next is The Bone Witch by Rinchapeko, and this one follows Tia, or T. I read her as T, but I know that's not how you pronounce her name. So I think Tia has the power of a bone witch. She's basically a necromancer, and when she's a little kid, she summons her brother from the dead, and that's what the book starts out with, so that's not a spoiler. It's the premise of the book. And she goes with somebody at the beginning in order to learn how to train her necromancy abilities. And so it's kind of Memoirs of a Geisha-ish in the context of where she's being trained and all of the skills she's learning, because it's not just magic. So that's why I wanted to include this one, even though again it's not necessarily a straight up magical school, it's still got that theme involved. We have another kind of military stylized one in the next recommendation, and that is An Ember in the Ashes by Sabata here. This is a book about two character perspectives, but the one that I'm specifically talking about for this section of the video is Elias, and it's a very Roman Empire inspired story in the sense that Elias and a bunch of others are training to become brutal warriors, and they have the masks that are associated with that privilege, except that Elias, for some reason, his mask is not bonding to him because masks bond to your face as you take up the ideals of this empire, and he's not comfortable with the empire, so the mask isn't taking to him. So that is what this is loosely about. There's also, I think, Laia, who is coming from an outside perspective, and I think she's joined part of a rebellion. So it's the rebellion, it's Elias, it's the school, and it's the military. So that is loosely what this is about, and it becomes a lot more obviously expansive after book one. And then next we have one that's more dark academia, and that is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. And this is where Alex Stern goes to Yale University, but Yale actually has a bunch of secret societies functioning there. And so she has this odd ability that enables her to see ghosts, and so she works with this guy named Darlington, who the society have paired her up with, and they are responsible for keeping everybody kind of in check so that their magic doesn't get ridiculous or dangerous to anybody. So that's kind of what her job is, but it's told in alternating timelines, and something has happened and you're trying to put the pieces together as to what, and there's also a few mystery things going on at the same time. So I loved the way that it was told in the alternating timeline aspect. People have said that this is kind of slow burny, but if you prefer adult books and if you like adult fantasy, I think you'll really enjoy this, because personally it was perfect to me and I loved it, and so I'm assuming that a lot of other people will love it as well. But if you're not sure on Leigh Bardugo because you've only read her young adult fantasy, try this anyway, because I wasn't a huge fan of her young adult stuff, only because I've kind of grown out of it, but I loved Ninth House, so that's why I wanted to include it, because dark academia is very much a magical school, even though again it's a subversion of that trope. Next is Renegades by Marissa Meyer. Again, more of an organization rather than a school, but it's kind of a cousin to this theme, so that's why I'm including it. Renegades is about Nova, and she is a supervillain, and when she was a very small child, the supervillains and the superheroes were at war, and her uncle Ace Anarchy, he was the one who saved her because she called for the superheroes to come and save her from somebody who was trying to get in and kill her family, and the superheroes never came, so she's lost all faith in them, and now she is part of the supervillains after the fall of Ace Anarchy to in part get revenge and in part to exact justice on the people that couldn't help her when she needed it. So she has to infiltrate the superhero organization, and there is like an arena battle, and it's got magical school kind of vibes in the sense that there are a bunch of other characters at Nova's age level, and they're all going through different training montages and development kind of simultaneously. So that's why I wanted to pop it on this list. Next is Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. This is about Spencer, and Spencer has always wanted to be a pilot, but her dad was a pilot and he ended up abandoning his flight crew, and now he has brought shame upon Spencer because this culture really reveres courage, and now they view her father, her late father, as a coward. And so she's having a lot of trouble trying to establish herself separately from that, and she's constantly fighting back against that label. And this book involves obviously a flight school that Spencer wants to become a part of, so that's what she is endeavoring to do. So loosely, that is the premise of Skyward. It's more military-ish focused because it's set on a planet that keeps getting attacked by these aliens, and so the flight crews have to defend against them. So it's not necessarily set on Earth, but it's so much fun. I also loved Skyward, so that's why I wanted to chuck it on this list. I've only got 2 more on this list. A few others I could loosely slide in, but I didn't feel like the justification was enough. So the second last one is The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon. Again, I feel like this is not very justified because it's a magical organization that's very much a puppet government under what Paige and everybody in her society is used to. So this book follows Paige, and in this world we're in Scion, London, so it's kind of like a regressed version of London, and it's got power manipulations from different forces than you would expect, and clairvoyancy is a thing, so people can see ghosts, interact with them, and there are different powers associated with that. Paige is a kind of clairvoyant, and one day she is recognized as a clairvoyant, and this is illegal, so she gets kidnapped and then taken to like a kind of camp, internment camp, and she meets Warden there, and Warden is not entirely human. So it's about them trying to, or Paige I guess, trying to break out of this camp that she's been stuck in. Because it's an organization that's kind of secret and that she's not really joining, she's just recognized and is trying to fight against, I feel like this doesn't really count, but I'm really hyped up for the 4th book release, so I wanted to include it in this video because I'm excited. And then the last book on this list probably loosely fits, but I'm still feeling like I'm cheating a little bit by including it, and it's Eye of the World, which is the Wheel of Time book 1, and there is mention of a sorceress academy in this book, but it's not actually shown yet. I'm assuming it comes in eventually, but the Aes Sedai are the sorcerers in this world, and they all trained somewhere, so I'm assuming that eventually it will crop up in the book, but we haven't seen it yet. So it's a book that will eventually have like a magical school or a magical setting that's academic, but it hasn't appeared yet, it's just been mentioned. So that is the last book on this recommendations list. If you have any other recommendations for magical school stuff, I'm always on the lookout. I know people will probably recommend A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik, and that is an instance where a school is not a safe place, kind of like the assassin school. You've got to fight to survive. So that is another book that has a magical school setting, but I haven't read it, so I wasn't sure about recommending it, but now you know. So there you go. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'll talk to you down in the comments, and I'll catch you in my next one. Bye.